Welcome back, everyone. This is the third panel of today, which is looking at ways of sustaining emerging practice. I'm just going to introduce our chair, Russell Martin, who's the director of ArtQuest and is also an artist. And at New Contemporaries, we work regularly with ArtQuest on both the one-to-one mentoring and the peer mentoring program, and also a data collecting project called Applied. So I'm going to hand over to Russell to introduce the panel. Thanks a lot.
Great, thank you, Kirsty. Is this on?
This one's, oh yeah, here, hold it.
Okay, cool. Even more technical difficulties. Thank you, Kirsty. And welcome to this panel. My name is Russell Martin. I'm director of ArtQuest and also an artist. I'm joined with by Anna Colin, Chris Rawcliffe and Matt Copson, who I'll introduce a little bit later on. So our question is sustaining emerging practice through new support structures and necessary funding models. So kind of summing that up perhaps more succinctly, what money and support do artists need? And just to frame a few points that will hopefully come up later on that we can pick up again in our conversation, I was thinking about this idea of emerging practice, which I think there was a paper about that yesterday as well. Alexander Masouris, talking about emerging as something that's to come, something that's kind of full of promise, and therefore, by extension, I would extend that to say, therefore, something that you can invest in or fund or put money into, and the understanding you'll get some kind of return out of that. And nowadays, that kind of funding, particularly in the arts, is increasingly linked to things like well-being or placemaking or urban regeneration or these other non-artistic issues which are incorporated into to try to make, in my opinion, to try to make the arts seem more economically investable or fundable or worthy of that kind of support. What we find at ArtQuest is that in many ways the needs of artists are very similar at all stages in their career, whether they're quote-unquote emerging or even bigger quotes established, whatever that might mean. And that most artists think that they're emerging basically the whole time. Mostly what we find people need is networks, information, advice, and that might be an uneven need throughout their careers, but it's pretty constant that people will always, at some stage, need a sounding board or some advice about what they might do next with their career. Also, what I find is that what people need is some encouragement as well, and an idea that they're not missing out on some piece of information or knowledge that everyone else knows about and is making them a successful artist, but actually it's just really hard to be an artist, and it's as much about serendipity and networks and being in the right place at the right time as it is about making good work. And there are a lot of artists who make really good work. Not a lot of it doesn't really get very far because of the circumstances that they find themselves in, having caring responsibilities or being from working class backgrounds or whatever it might be. So I think I hope this panel will kind of pick up on some of those things too. The second part of the question is about necessary funding models, and I think from some of the conversations we've had before, I think we'll also be expanding that a little bit to look more around the kind of business model of an artist, not to borrow too much from management speak, but how the turnover happens, where the money comes from, where it gets spent, where the time comes from and where it gets spent as well. Funding is always going to be part of that, but by definition it can't be the only source of money that artists have. It's got to be quite targeted, even in Scandinavian countries where artists are much more funded at a much higher rate. It still doesn't cover every expenditure that an artist might have. And I think also picking up from the last panel, it'll be interesting to also think about collaboration, about non-financial parts of an artist's business model, about bartering, helping people out, doing people favors, collaborating, that kind of stuff. So, as a last note, I'm also quite keen to widen it away from the art world, widen this conversation away from the art world a bit as well into the context that artists live in. So, particularly what I often work in is artists in London, but we also have an artist who lives in Los Angeles on the panel as well. Given that in recent surveys, about 36% of artists said that they earn less than £1,000 a year from their practice, how do you then spend £1,500 a month on your rent if you're living in London? And the idea of affordable studios is of course very valuable, but if you can't afford your rent or transport, then it's only touching the sides, so to speak. So I think I'll leave it at that for now, and we'll go on to the panel. So first of all, we're going to hear from Anna Colin, who's a curator, educator and researcher, and a co-founder and the director of Open School East in Margate. Anna. Do you want someone to do your slides?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't mind, I can't remember the order, but yeah. I guess we can put the first one. That's fairly safe. Well, thanks for the invitation. And sorry, I can only be here for this panel, which sounds a bit rude, but it's a bit of a busy time, and I don't live in London, so apologies for that. So I was expecting, well, I don't know why, but in my mind, this was going to be a room full of people fresh out of college wanting answers. So I've kind of tailored my presentation a little bit towards that. Can you hear me? Because I'm hearing my voice in the background. It's very weird. Yeah, it's fine? Good. So yes, a few years ago we started Open School East in London, and we moved this organization to Margate. And Open School East was several things. It was at the time, so it was 2013, the tripling of the fees, tuition fees that happened 2 years previously. Student debt was, huge, and there was this kind of, increasing discontent from artists about what they were getting at university or at art college for their money. So there was that in the background. The second thing, which was in the background, was can we create an educational environment that's less school-like and that's giving more autonomy to students, and a place where they're not going to be put in competition with each other, where they're not going to be giving pressure about the market potentially, which can also happen, especially in London. But also we were interested in what was happening to informal places of knowledge sharing, socializing, kind of general discovery, like community centers, libraries, kind of social and social-cultural places, and we were noticing that many of them were closing. A huge number of libraries closed in 2012, just a year before we moved to, where we started the project. So we were interested in creating a space that was part art school, independent, small, non-accredited, part community center or social-cultural neighborhood center. And what would it look like for students to be embedded in a real context and really seeing who their neighbors are and having the neighbors in their space, and vice versa? What would it look like to people who lived around us? So we were located in Hackney and de Beauvoir, in a former library and community center. What would it be like for kind of neighbors and former users of the building to come back and share a space without students? So that was the originality. We've now moved to Margate for sustainability reasons. We couldn't really afford the rent for much longer in London. We knew we couldn't become an NPO, being in London. My co-director and I at the time were already living in Kent, and for the same reasons, because it wasn't sustainable to live in London. So we just did a bit of research and decided to move the organization somewhere where it would be more affordable, where we could get more funding, and where we could, where there was an art scene, so that there was a context for dialogue between the people who go to Open School East and then, the professional artist community. But there's also a need for socio-cultural activities, because Margate, as many of you I'm sure know, is a very deprived, economically deprived environment with a lot of poverty, and the cultural regeneration that started 10 years ago is beneficial to some, but as always is not serving everyone. So we can put some slides, and I'm going to try and race, but the title I've chosen sounds a bit academic, but it's just so situated and self-directed learning as practice development. So essentially, one of the first aims of Open School East is to develop the practice of emerging artists and cultural practitioners, regardless of their age. So we've got people usually between 23 and 63 years old, but the majority of people would be in their late 20s. It's a self-directed environment. The first time is programmed by us in collaboration with the mentors, with a guest artist. So next year we're working with Anthea Hamilton, and the project is something that happens over a term that involves other practitioners to be invited, and us developing a big collaborative project which has a public output at the end. And situated because we are very much develop knowledge from experience, and we feed back that knowledge into new experiences. We create a community at Open School East, but we also work with many different communities around us who are part of our programs. We're very much embedded locally. We look at and we are fed constantly by different people who come and participate in Open School East activities and actually really take over. So many of our programs are self-directed to a certain extent. It's not just artists who self-direct their own learning. So if we can put the next slide. So that's a new building we're in, which was built as the Thanet School of Arts and Crafts in 1931, and in 1974, so that's the building on the left, the School of Arts and Crafts was discontinued, but it was the council which owned the building turned it into an adult and community education centre, which is still active today. So we're sharing space with them. We've got 2 rooms, and then we use a bit more spaces. You'll see some pictures. And it's fantastic to be in an environment that has this art and crafts tradition, and yet is dedicated to kind of popular education, general access to knowledge and skills, and we work a lot with them, and it's quite interesting. And on the right, this is the studio we rent at Crate, which is a studio complex in Margate. That's for our associate artists. So the learning and public activities happen in the building, in the centre of Margate, and the making happens, like the everyday making. That's really 24/hours, 7 days a week access happens in there, which is 5 minutes down the road. So we've got 4 programs. The Associates program, which is the first one we set up. It's a year long, it's free, it's non-accredited, it's 2 days a week. It's partly self-directed, as I said. So first one is programmed by us in collaboration with the mentors, an artist around a project, really a collaborative project to build some cohesion in the group. And then the second and third terms are programmed by the associate artists themselves, who are given a budget, contacts, tools, guidance, and really develop their own curriculum in a sense. They get opportunities to exhibit with partners, regionally, nationally. We do all sorts of things, and they get to participate in other programs and to be paid to assist with the delivery of other programs. So we've started developing a not self-sustaining economy, but at least we provide employment to different people within the buildings. The public program on the right is all sorts of things. It could be a collaboration with the University of Kent, the Centre for Critical Thought, who deliver a seminar in critical theory at Open School East because they're interested in being outside of the campus of Canterbury and interested in what we do, and we're interested in their content and ideas. it's that. It's also partnership projects with organizations, for example, like MenCap, who work with people with learning difficulties, and that could be a 12-week long filmmaking program where people are going to make a film at the end. Everything we do at Open School is based around the production, like the development of skills. We learn core skills, and at the end we do something that has a public confrontation and has visibility. The associates are very involved in programming the public program, because everything they program in the second and third term has to be public. So that's one of the, so it could be anything from a 6-day ceramics workshop or Arduino workshop to a one-off talk or workshop with someone like Lawrence Lake, or many different people, or with Lawrence or Hamdan. I mean, just quoting people we've had at school, for example. Okay, well, that will be the end then. So then the Young Associates program, that's a brand new program we started this year. It's a program that's free. It's for 12 young people between the ages of 16 and 18 who, until they joined Open School, were out of education, training and employment, or they were about to fall in that category. So they left college for all sorts of reasons, not getting in with the mainstream education system, failing, having mental health problems, having financial problems which prevented them from pursuing kind of standard education. So they were with us for 12 months. This one is accredited. They get a level 2 diploma, which can lead them onto some kind of foundation and pre-foundation program in regional universities and beyond. They get to work with amazing artists and designers and architects. So we're working with Assemble. We're working with the designers, graphic designers, Kellenberger Wright, working with the sculptor, Nicolas Deschays. We're working with textile designer Yemia Rossile. So they're working with professionals who are not necessarily teachers in their everyday life, but have networks which they can open to the young people, and have an interest in empowering these young people who arrive in a fairly bad state of not being able to speak for a long time and thinking that art is definitely not for them, especially in Margate, where they get pushed out. And young people at that age is very much a part of the population that is neglected in this town, like in many other towns. So we'll see how it goes. It just literally started 2 months ago. And then the Despacito Art School, which is work we do with very young people from the Roma community of Margate. We didn't plan to do that. They just knocked at our door permanently, incessantly, until we did something with them. So we trained ourselves. We told them they had to be in charge, that they had to name their school, that they had to come up with some ideas and content, and we would run it with them. And we agreed on that. And so we've been doing that for 2 years now. And I guess a lot of the programs we do, which engage questions around safeguarding, around ethics, around how to work with people, how to be accessible to vulnerable people, how to be accessible to people with different physical and mental conditions. This is something that has become very much part of how we think as an organization, and how we're putting the question of access, but not just financial or intellectual access, but access for neurodiverse people, access for physical obviously, but it's really thinking the question of not inclusivity, but actually we don't want to use this term, but we use the term non-exclusive, because we can't be inclusive. We can't have everyone, but we don't want to be exclusive. So I think that's all for now. I had prepared a slide. If you just go to the end of it, just super quickly, I don't need to read it, just go race to the end, because I had too many things. Yeah, you can go quicker, or if you can, it's very much at the end. There's a list of artist development programs that are free. That's a small list, that are doing really interesting work, just UK-based. There are lots elsewhere, and the Dutch Art Institute, which I wanted to include because he's doing very incredible work. So, to the students, to the people who have recently graduated, leave London. It's very exciting elsewhere, and you don't need necessary diplomas. Just go and spend a year with people who, like you, need peers and need people to think with and to think ethically about what it is to be an artist in this precarious and gentrified environment.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Anna. And now we'll hear from Matt Copson, who is an artist who is living and working in Los Angeles.
Hi, I'm Matt Copson. I'm an artist living and working in Los Angeles.
Told you.
Yeah. I make art, and that normally takes the form of animations and sculptures. That's how I tend to phrase it, but that becomes installation. I am going to try and not make any sweeping generalizations, which is normally my forte, and not speak on behalf of anybody, because all artists are obviously very, very different and require very different things. So I'll just speak about things from my perspective. Being an artist, it normally just comes down to like your goals, like what is your project, what do you want, and what's your agenda, and the ways in which you need to find answers to those are gonna vary very radically. And when it comes to speaking about funding models, I don't really have a lot to say. From my experience, I try and avoid bureaucracy at all times. So whenever I see an application form, I try and run away because I know I'm going to spend way too much time doing it. And time is the most important asset that I have. And this is kind of like touched upon by Russell, but I do feel in this country, and speaking to like a lot of French or Canadian people, there is a very anti-art agenda that comes with funding models, where art has to be defined and positioned through a very, very capitalist agenda of what is it going to do. And I fundamentally disagree with art doing things in the classic sense of the kind of the auspices of progressive politics, like helping this and that community. I think that that's a misunderstanding of art a huge amount of the time. Whilst it can do those things, I don't think we can quantify it on those terms, and that is literally what the status quo government would love us to do, to position it on those economic terms. So a lot of the time when I look at funding models, I'm left a little bit depressed by my lack of ability to be able to just defend something for having artistic merit alone. And something like New Contemporaries to me was like the opposite of that. Not to, Kirsty's going to love this bit, but New Contemporaries was so important to me, and it led to absolutely everything that I'm doing now. Having something straight out of art school that was an audience, a big audience, selected by artists who I actually cared about and respected, and gave me like a kind of a purpose immediately after art school. It meant I didn't care about my degree show in the way that a lot of young artists care about their degree shows being this like big moment, which is kind of a myth, because I knew there was this thing coming afterwards. I knew that I could think on these other terms. It introduced me to people that I still know to this day, it was psychologically really important to have something that I knew was coming up, that I knew was going to kind of keep me going. When you're like just emerging out of art school, you psychologically need something like that. You need to feel like there's something there, because you're used to this system where you've kind of got tutorials all the time with people. You've got an audience that has to sit there and listen to your shit for ages. And outside in the real world, no one cares, of course. Why would they? So you're not going to sit down and have 45 minutes of you being like, well, I'm really interested in the materiality of Adorno, blah, blah, blah. In the real world, there's none of that. And that is really important with an art school. You need that time and you need that space, which brings me on to like the most important thing for an artist in terms of like sustainability and this kind of psychological sustaining, which is seen in community. It's the most crucial thing, having people around you that you can speak about, that you can keep in dialogue with, and that's on like a pure artistic level, what you're doing with your work, but also like sharing of knowledge. Like I remember coming out of art school and I didn't know what an edition of a work was, and somebody asked to buy, like they were like, what's the edition of this work? And I didn't know what that meant, and I was embarrassed that I didn't know what that meant. And all of these kind of terms of money and things, when you don't have these gallery structures yet, it's important that you have people around you who can share that knowledge with you, and you can actually speak about how to make this sustainable, and to think on those financial terms, to not be embarrassed to talk about money and how you do all of that stuff. What else have I got written down here? Those are like the main things I want to speak about now. I don't have like a full talk other than just like spieling. Yeah, I feel like there needs to be far more risk-taking in funding in this country. I feel like that we need to just be prepared to talk about these things. Like, for instance, with residencies, I've been offered loads of residencies before, and they're like, oh, there's this money so you can like make some work. And you're like, yeah, but what about my rent for the month or 2 month or 3 month period that you're suggesting I have to take this time out? The money has to just be way stronger on that front. Yeah, another thing is jobs, of course. So finding a job that like suits you, and for me the most important thing I needed was time. I think sometimes the idea of people needing studios in this day and age can be overrated. I understand that like a lot of painters or something might need the space, but a huge amount of people I know are working in a kind of very post-studio digital way. And so having that time is really important. I was lucky enough to be able to find teaching work, which was ideal, but you need work that gives you time, that's somewhat rewarding, and that's something you don't get too into and too good at. I have loads of friends who got really good at their jobs, and that was a trap. It turns out. Yeah, also like being prepared to think of art in terms, I think art school teaches people that the only way to be an artist is by being an artist. And people speak about the art world, but there is no art world. There are so many different art worlds. And I understand what people mean when they're talking about that, but they're literally talking about Frieze Art Fair, which is like low down on the register of what art could be. And a huge amount of the best artists I know and the best people I know from art school and stuff are working as set designers or video directors or all of these things, and kind of expanding out those broadens of what it can be to be an artist is really, really important. We'll carry on talking from these points if any of them interest anyone, and I'll pass over to you.
Thanks. Good, thank you.
And my final panelist before we go into conversation is Chris Rawcliffe, who is an artist, curator and artistic director of Forma Arts, which is a commissioning and production visual arts organisation. Thanks, Chris.
Hello, does that work? Yeah. I think it's a good follow-on from Matt's, because I'm going to pick up on some of the things you said as well. I started off as an artist, came out of art school in 2006, and it took me to my early 30s to really understand that I didn't really need to make art to have a practice that was sort of fulfilling for me. And now I'm, for the first time in a few years, it's only been a few years that I've had a full-time job. So I spent about a decade sort of figuring it out. I'll tell you where I work right now, because I want to promote it, because not enough people know it. It's Forma. We're a national portfolio organisation, so we're part of a sort of network of organisations that were funded by Arts Council. As Russell said, we became established at producing work for artists or for galleries. So typically for festivals, or they used to work out with the ICA in Barbican, making shows for them or performances. And in more recent years, when the art world sort of changed and evolved, we've become more of a commissioning agency. So we sit somewhere in between, like a very small sibling of Art Angel, if you want, or maybe Film and Video Umbrella somewhere there. In the past, Forma had a sort of glory period before the art world brought production back in-house, when money was a bit more loose and money was being thrown at Forma back in the day to produce kind of ambitious multidisciplinary projects. So Alvinato here in the top left corner at Tate. Down here is Bill Morrison Film Commission with Johan Johansson, which toured the world, and it costs about £30,000 per night to put on that show. So these were sort of big budgets at the time. Ryoji Akaida there, which was a sort of had a semi-commercial relationship with Forma for a period before that he went to listen and then moved on. More recently, when I joined in the last year or so, we're trying to reinvent Forma in response to what the sector needs. I thought it was going to be very much commissioning with a scale of artists, but actually we're finding that what we're becoming is a sort of artist agency in a way, where we do anything from almost kind of crits and tutorials with them, right through to, this is with the emerging end of the spectrum of artists. We'll do like crits, tutorials, we'll write funding applications for them, we'll provide funding to them and R&D, we'll produce the work, we'll present it, we'll tour it. So it's kind of full package. With more established artists or people with a longer career, we might come in as a service provider almost. So a filmmaker might come to us and say, I want to do a shoot on location in another country, I need help, and we come in like this. So we're lucky to be funded to provide that service, and we're still reinventing where we sit, but here you've got Benedict Drew in the top left corner, which was at IMT that came out from a small R&D project we did with him. Mary Reed Kelly and Patrick Kelly at Studio Voltaire, which was a collaboration with Studio Voltaire. We've got top right corner is Himali Singh Soin, which we launched quite recently. This was a collaboration with Freeze Fair and Channel 4 Random Acts. And a transformative project for her as an artist. She was mostly a writer and poet. This is only her second film, and now it's touring the world. We're building it up to a multidisciplinary performance with live quartet and a performance artist. So hopefully we want it to be that moment in her career that's gone from being an artist that's struggling to find funding or to develop like touring projects to really have that visibility. And then down in the right corner is Beth Kettle's performance that we did with Art Night as part of their sort of application program on the side. As I said earlier, I started as an artist, and I was quite lucky that I made a decision right from the beginning that every job I would do to support my practice would be related to my practice somehow. So I didn't want to just work in pubs like a lot of my mates, or just be a techie, which I did for a bit. I was always like, let's find a job that sort of supports me in another way, basically doing learning or earning more cash or getting more opportunities out of it. And I just give a few outposts was where I was in Norwich for a few years, and it was the first time someone threw money at us. We were 24, and Arts Council supported us to do a program of shows. And it taught me like what it's like to collaborate and to program and to engage with audiences and schools and local authorities, all of that sort of stuff. So massive learning curve. But I was also an artist. I was making work. We would show there sometimes. Then I went to Art Monthly, which was 2 days a week roughly, freelance work, and I did that for 6 years to support my practice. So it was perfect in London. It was just about enough money to survive. But then there I was, meeting. Great writers. That's where I met George, for instance. I met a whole group, a generation of writers, of critics, of curators, of artists through the magazine, and really it was bringing me something more than a few quid here or there. And my boss at the time was Jack Wendler, and he took me aside one day and he said, look, the two people who had the job before you were Richard Moss, who had a big show at Barbican not that long ago, and important photographer, filmmaker, and Liam Gillick. And he was like, look where they are now. And so that sort of put the pressure on me, and I was like, well, I'm neither of them, and I don't even really make art anymore. But what he was trying to tell me, and in fact he spelt it out at the end, he said, don't get too good at this job. And that's what you were saying about the job trap. He was like, in a sort of American accent, he was like, I don't want to know you as the guy who was good at the job. He wanted to remember me as the guy trying to be an artist. And it sort of resonated, and it was like, well, if you're not going to have a career at Art Monthly, then don't be the guy that everyone remembers for being at Art Monthly. And so that was a good moment, and at that time I opened a project space called Pronoun. And again, I started collaborating a lot more, learning more about how to make a pound worth 10 by bartering, by match funding, by offering an artist 500 quid if they could bring 200 quid, and sort of really resourceful. And I was lucky to be, I think, at maybe the end of that generation of London project spaces where there was 10 within a mile of me, whereas I feel like it's a much harder game now. And there was definitely this sort of idea of network and collaboration going on, sharing materials, resources, going to each other's shows, which was sometimes the only audience we'd get. And then it led me to really like the final stage of learning that my practice was more about collaborating and actually supporting others was when I went to Arts Council. They'd funded me a few times from Outpost when I was in my early 20s right through to Pro-Num when I was trying to do bigger shows. And I worked there for about 4 years, and it was full-time, and it killed my practice as an artist for good because the bureaucracy, spending all my time helping other people. But I didn't leave straight away because I realised I was sort of doing an MA in a way. I was getting paid to absorb so much information from how to write applications, how to do public talks, all this sort of stuff that you don't really learn at art school, that you don't really get to do as an artist. And I was someone was paying me to do that, and my job was to hang around with artists and spaces, including New Contemporaries. So we had about 4 years as your relationship manager. So I was the person between ACE and New Contemporaries. So again, I was sort of stealing ideas and business plans. Like I sort of learn all this stuff. And finally now I feel like I've reached a moment where I've come to some agency a bit more where I'm working with Former, and it's directly with artists, and we're lucky to be funded. I just wanted to leave it with a couple of two little pointers for our conversation. This is a John Baldessari funny artwork he made, tips for selling art. But really, I always saw three sort of legs in an artist's career. One's survival, and it's what most of us do for a long time. And if we don't give up, we might move on to the next one. And the next one's perceived success for me, which is where I sort of gave up, which is my understanding of being an artist was to have a studio and a commercial gallery and do 3 shows a year and, whatever. And actually, a lot of my friends who were getting there were not very happy with that lifestyle. Big periods of being alone, limited funding, commercial success or not, and the pressures of it. And I understood that actually there is no real moment in your career that you've got the success that you think is this sort of elusive thing that you're chasing. And then the third one's thriving, and I feel lucky right now to feel that I've entered that zone. Is when you've either you're making art or not, or you're commercial or you're not, or you're collaborative or not, whatever it is, or you leave London, all these things, is that moment when you feel suddenly comfortable in your practice enough that in my case, it means being a sort of Sunday painter now, like making art for me rather than trying to sell it or engage with peers. And it reminded me of a John Baldessari's story he did. I went to see him at Tate, I think it was about 2008 or 9, when I was working at Art Monthly. And he flew in for this talk, and he was so engaging and funny. He looks like Father Christmas, and he was very endearing. And he looked at the crowd, and I could see he sort of looked a bit sorry. And he told a story that when he was young, really to be an artist in California in the 60s, you sort of just had to make art. It was not at all a trendy career path. He said he used to lie and say he was a teacher because it was so untrendy. He couldn't go on dates if he said he was an artist. So he would go around saying he was a teacher, and his uncle ran a cinema which closed down, and he had a whole cinema as a studio. And he was reflecting on how there was a moment maybe being an artist that it meant making art, and then obviously it was a hardship, but really he was focusing on art. And when he looked at the audience, he sort of laughed and said he felt sorry for the younger generation of artists emerging, and he said, you need to be good at art, of course, but you also need to be well-spoken, well-read, gone to the right art school, you probably need to be good looking, speak 2 languages. He was like, you have to DJ at parties. And he sort of had it this 70-plus year old man sort of nailed it on the head, really, about what it is to be an artist. Certainly an emerging artist in the contemporary art scene in London, there's potentially a lot of expectations around what they need to do beyond making art. There you go.
Could you put it back to the slide before that had the 3 phrases on the side? Because I think that's a really nice frame for what we might talk about just now. Thank you, Chris, and thank you all for such really stimulating presentations. Now, obviously, I have the wonderful job of finding a starting point. I think one of the things that perhaps a nice place to start would be this idea of a job. of as someone who works as an artist and works in artist professional development, one of the things I think about sometimes is being an artist a job, and or is it some kind of other semi-professional or non-professional or Sunday painter, or what's the kind of model of it and how does it fit together? And I think this was touched upon on actually all of the presentations. This was sort of starting to be touched upon. So Matt, you were talking about not the jobs being a trap, which I think is a nice and interesting place to start from, but also having a job and having an income or having some money from somewhere is a necessity as well. So how did you get into what it is you're doing just now, and where was it particularly intentional? Were you trying to get a job as a tutor? Were you looking for something that would facilitate that balance? And what do you think of that balance? What is that balance?
I think the fundamental thing is that being an artist can be a job, but it also cannot be a job, and that's like up to you. I always wanted it to be a job. Like, I wanted to make money by being an artist. That to me was a form of freedom, but for other people that's not. Like, it involves so much hustling and so much things that people might consider the antithesis to making art in order to get to a position where you can make money fully from art. But I don't think that's necessarily as bad as that seems. I think it's just a choice. As you were saying, that there's like, for you, freedom is like being the Sunday painter, and I think that that's great. And I think we too often have this idea of like being an artist as this one thing, and the success of being an artist like that. It's just the way that art operates in our society. In terms of how I got into that, I got lucky. Somebody offered me a teaching job, and I managed to do that. But I wasn't teaching art, I was teaching filmmaking to 13 to 18-year-old kids from a group of schools around Oxfordshire, and I'd do that 2 days a week, basically. And that was ideal for me because it was teaching, as anyone who knows done it, is actually really, really rewarding as an experience and relates to what you're doing in your own way. But there came a point very recently, because I make work that is both expensive to make and much harder to sell than lots of other works, that I decided to kind of step away from that, which is when I moved out of this country. And so that was like a decision that I wanted to kind of up my focus on making work, and I felt that I could take that risk at that stage. Does that answer what you were saying?
Yeah. And Anna, you were saying that the artists who in the associates program, they are also involved in the public program and they get paid for that. I don't want to just equate jobs with pay. That's a slightly more boring way to go. But could you talk about what the kind of motivation for that was in terms of Open School East and the structure of the artists be getting financial and non-financial benefits?
Yeah, so I need to clarify, they're not getting paid to program, the public program. They're getting paid when they're delivering workshops. So if they are inviting John Baldessari, emailing John Baldessari to invite him to come, they're not getting paid for that. But that's part of their learning. They're learning how to basically run a space and be kind of art managers, which we think is a very important thing to do. They're getting something out. They're getting a budget, and then usually the person, maybe not John Baldessari, but perhaps says yes because they're intrigued that one, they haven't been invited by the administrator but by an artist, and two, that it's not any art school, it's a different environment. So, but when they do deliver workshops and they spend 3 days or 3 hours planning, 3 hours delivering, they're getting paid for every of these 6 hours. What's the motivation? So what was the question?
So in terms of why Open School East wanted to have that element of public, I mean, I understand you've spoken very well, very interestingly about it's kind of, there's an embeddedness about Open School East being in a community that isn't artists.
Yeah.
And that artists, so it's kind of an all-round training program, but was it devised at the beginning that artists who would be delivering the programs would also be paid, and that would also be a benefit for them?
Yeah. Well, not at the beginning. The beginning was a bit messier than that. People were not, we would offer people, the associates, to work on a workshop with us, but to be honest, we had zero money. Well, we had money to begin with. We had £100,000 from the Barbican Centre, which is a great way of starting a project. But we were very precarious. It was hard to come to see if we were going to be able to continue. And we didn't have this, this ethos that we have built up is thanks to the associates, standing up and saying, hang on, you're saying it's a free school, but you're putting us in debt by asking us to do something for your organization, even though we're not obliged. But if 12 other people do it and I don't do it, then I feel like I'm indebted, or I owe you something. So this changed. Let's say that 2 years after we realized that we couldn't get any of the associates to do anything for free unless it was part of their learning, like inviting John Baldessari for a talk or workshop. But the idea of having, we were interested in the idea of an art school that learns in and with the public, and not an enclosed space that just looks at itself. We wanted to have this kind of interaction and confrontation. We wanted the artists to think about who their audience is. So if they're interested in queer colleges, as some of our associates are this year, and they put on an event and they invite their dream practitioner to come and do a workshop for 2 days, but who are they talking to? Who's interested in the same topic as theirs? So it's for them to identify, so they can build not so much an audience for them, but it gives them visibility, and through that they meet people, and they trigger collaborations and long-lasting relationships. So that's really interesting, and this is not something we'd expected, but it's obvious now. But yes, thinking, who am I talking to when I'm an artist? Am I doing work just for myself, which is completely fine, or am I doing work and thinking who's at the receiving end of what I'm doing? Is the meaning I'm creating impacting someone? So that's my response to your question. But just wanted to say really quickly, is being an artist a job? I would say yes. Freelance, artists are freelancers, and freelancers are not treated not very well, let's say. So it's very typical that as a freelancer, whatever your profession, you get an email at 6 o'clock on Friday p.m. by someone who's clocked off and says, oh, you need to look at this, Monday 11 o'clock is the deadline, and this person has gone on and have their weekend, but because you freelance, you love your job, you're so flexible, you could work at any time, even a weekend and at night, So there's something around, the perpetuation of this partly self-exploiting system, but also just projection of exploitation on people. And I think artists should say, yes, I have a job and my timetable, is my business, but I am not going to be expected to work either for free or out of office hours, or to just do something different to you, just because you have a salary and you have comfort,
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that notion of artists exploiting themselves is a really important one, and an important thing to remember. And I think goes throughout a lot of other freelance working as well, more generally freelance working, although it's incredibly poorly paid to be an artist. Chris, do you have any reflections on any of that stuff? As someone who, I was struggling, you said, I started off as an artist, rather than I'm an artist or something. But
yeah, because I don't make enough to define myself as an artist anymore. I think there's a moment where the threshold sort of changes. When I go and meet an artist now, I can relate, I hope, to that conversation, or to the struggle, or to the questions and the ideas, but I don't feel on par with them. But again, this question of is the artist a job, just to reiterate or take it further, I think it's even more than a job in a way. There's not that many sectors where your job is also infused by your personality at that level. certainly artists who are asked to come and talk on panels or to have their picture next to their work or to explain the rationale for their making through the whole career of their practice. We're looking at the person as well as their work. Certainly nowadays anyway. And so I feel like it's, you could argue it's a lot more than a job, and most cultural creative positions are the same, but there's not that many other sectors which are as sort of total.
You kind of identify so closely with what the work is that you
it's quite
you will
hard.
exploit yourself, and you will work over the weekend. Well, hello Saturday.
It's a conscious decision,
but for which we're being paid. Thank you very much.
It's a conscious decision for an artist or a collective to not be equal to their work. You know what I mean? They have to really resist that.
Yeah, and if I could interject, so I also think that like art history has like taught us a total myth that was perpetuated by basically quite a lot of rich people, which is like the Duchamp model of like, I can't remember if my art history is correct, but I think he went to like South America for ages, and he had like a moment of being anti-work, essentially. So he's like, I'm just going to piss around in this room for a while, and that's me as the artist. So this kind of like dandyish figure of being like, I'm separating myself from society, I'm anti-work, which I always thought was a really exciting idea in theory. It just seems like the most naive position imaginable now, but I think there is like a huge amount of that within the canonical history of art that teaches us that, you know, obviously it's men and white men, that you can somehow exist outside these structures and just like kind of throw some paint at something, and the gesture of that is enough. But yeah, these days, I mean, I spend most of my time doing admin, I think.
Yeah, and also, you know, the structures themselves have changed a lot. You know, when John Balasai was getting his giant studio, it was the size of a cinema. It was also a moment where a lot of industry had moved out of the cities, and there were these large warehouses on docks. There were huge spaces, but there wasn't any money to redevelop them or any idea of what the next phase of the economy was going to look like. So there were resources there that it was a timing thing, I think is what I'm trying to say as well. I'm going to come to the audience in just 1 second once I ask one more question. We've got just over 5 minutes left. But I think I also wanted to talk about the geography just very quickly. So you said that you were in London and then you moved out. Well, Open School East was in London and moved out to Margate. Were you always based out of London as well? As individually?
Well, yeah. I relocated to Kent before school relocated to Margate.
And you were studying in London, and then now you're in LA, and you're still hanging on like me.
Yeah.
And it's this idea, I guess, tying it in with work a little bit, that artists are also the people who do the jobs in the art world as well. We always end up as the people running Open School East or teaching or running other organisations. And I wonder how important anyone on the panel feels that this idea of a critical mass of artists is, perhaps particularly for people, I mean, LA has an art world. Margate also has an art world on a different scale from LA. And how, maybe if you have any reflections, Anna, on how important that critical mass is of having a lot of artists who are not only making the work, but are also running the galleries and running their organisations. And if you feel that London still has a place in Margate or in that sort of structure.
Yeah, I think Margate still needs an influx of artists. It's really exciting that a very kind of new generation of artists is moving there, but what we were just discussing that earlier, what we're lacking is just a few more kind of senior figures who can employ young artists, can inspire them, can teach them how they survived, how they made it. We have a few slightly more senior artists having studios there, but and then Tracy Emin, so that's the other end of the spectrum. But I think we're missing a kind of mid-career generation, like 5 of them having being present in town, because the art scene is very new and it's very it's hard to distinguish what the art scene from the creative scene. So there are the Margate creatives, and it's not always clear, and they might call themselves artists, but what they make is not necessarily what we working in the art world would consider, art. It would be more like, it's a form of cultural production, but it doesn't sit in kind of the circuits that we know: exhibitions, museums, art centers, etc. So it's kind of it's a bit messy, it's a bit blurry. It's coming together, and so such. I mean, it feels like. Feels like the artist studios and the new initiatives that are being opened are not necessarily opened by people who practice as artists, but they're more opened by entrepreneurs, people who see possibilities of sustaining their businesses, creative businesses. So it's a very different thing to London. There are a few artist-run spaces. In fact, the most interesting artist-run space has been started by 3 of our former associates at Open Schools. And it's very exciting to see a space that really understands production, dissemination, discourse in one place, and has studio facilities, a risograph, just different things, and exhibitions and lots of different things. But it feels like the only project space, as we knew project spaces until 5 years ago in London, and probably they still exist. I'm too old to know them.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. So at this stage, I know you all have burning questions for the panel. Does anyone want to start us off with anything? Yes.
I'm a student here at Courtauld with quite a few friends across art schools in London and the rest of the country. And in a funny way, I'm sort of thinking about their careers more than they are at the moment. And I sort of want to ask the panel, in response to what Matt said actually, about engaging with the structures in which they're practicing. Why does it have to be such a leap from graduate or being a new graduate? I mean, obviously in the life of contemporaries, people will be like graduates, but of course there's 3 years is a long time in which to sort of get comfortable or prime yourself for the world in which you're going to be engaging with. Is it a question of maturity with your practice?
I guess I'll answer that. I think that, I think as with all education, it's been too careerized, and that, like, even, when everyone started paying £9,000 a year, university suddenly became a space where people couldn't mess around for 3 years, which is just such a problem, because people should have the freedom to waste time essentially in those 3 years. And all of the best stuff and the best experiences I had at art school, I'm really not trying to be flippant by saying this, were from me having fun with some friends of mine and just having conversation that seemed kind of silly at the time or something, but actually became way more profound, and those kind of relationships and thoughts that came from not actually doing stuff or acting like an artist should act like. So it's difficult because on one hand it's you come out of art school, you do not know how to deal with the real world or the structures of an art world, but at the same time it's I think we should champion any freedom for people in that position to make of it what they will, to waste time in a productive way. And I think if we get too career focused, then that can be an issue. And you sometimes look at some of the MA courses, and they really suffer in comparison to the BA courses, because the mentality on the BA courses is way freer, and the MA ones become do you know if this gallerist is going to turn up to our MA show? And it's well, no, that's not the right attitude. The attitude has to be what's new, what's interesting to do, what can we produce here, how, art's about the Oedipal relationship with the generation above, destroy everything, we create something new. And so art schools at their very best would be that, but I understand the kind of innate hypocrisy there of you need to be taught something, about how to survive. And often it takes a long time to mature and get to a place where you feel comfortable with putting anything out there in the first place anyway. And when you first come out, you feel very kind of ripe for exploitation, probably because you are. So, yeah.
Can I add a little thing? Sure, yes. there's a sort of there's been a moment of collapse between what art school says to students and what the sector says to artists, where I was too young probably to remember it properly, but that sort of Blair period when the art world or the creative world became quantified as a creative industry, and the government was, in England anyway, was very conscious of the economic impact and social impact of its creatives. And by quantifying it, when you quantify something, it means you have to have a way of measuring it, and that's done by looking at capital, basically. Is it what's worth something, and how do we monetize it, and what's the return on investment? And there was a time when art schools were just training you to be a great artist, hopefully, or a great thinker or something, or just space to become a musician, whatever. But the gap, maybe in the last 20 years, is the art schools are still sort of selling that romantic idea that, and it's a fake story, you know, like most artists who come out of art school are not going to live from their practice, and yet they're sort of sold that dream. And there's that sort of attitude. It's like I came from something I think you're echoing, which is, Matt, which is be resistant to it, or even maybe have a sort of punk approach to it of like, you know, let's go against that establishment or that status quo or whatever. But there's also another reality, which is the sector is not like that. The sector is actually uber quantified, and if you don't know the difference between Arts Council and British Council, you're probably screwed, you know. And I think that's the harsh reality, I think, for artists emerging now, maybe.
Thank you. So I'm afraid we only have time for one more question. Does any? I saw a hand up over here. Yes, at the back. Hello.
I was thinking that nowadays the career of artists is really similar to the career of being a curator, in terms of being an independent curator, because also the component of time is really important, and the way also in which university or school of art structure the curatorial course, and then it's really close to the one of the artist one. Then of course there's always like a curator that comes from a more traditional kind of art historian background, as an art historian background, but then there's like the other more kind of creative. So I would like to ask you if you have the same feeling, and it feels like also in terms of precarity and so on, would be good to be a creator as well, or if you still think that there's more a kind of sustainable career to be a creator? And,
Wait, are you defining a creator as different to an artist?
Curator.
Oh, curator. Oh, God knows. Fuck that.
Anna, do you want to respond to that one?
So what's the actual question? Sorry.
So the question, if I can paraphrase and do correct me if I get it wrong, is do you feel like it's more sustainable to be a curator than it is to be an artist?
Well, the good thing about being a curator,
They have salaries.
well,
Some of them.
not many. Artists don't really need curators necessarily. They're sometimes better curators than curators. Curators are nothing without artists. So that's a privilege of the artist, I think. Is it better? I mean, I would, you know, there's so little so little money in curating, but as an artist, you should have a go at curating and trying to get the few gigs that are available, because I think artists are, very talented curators. I don't know if it's any better. It's very different. Like I never considered for a second being an artist, and will not. But
I think one of the issues is the word curator has become meaningless.
Yeah.
Like it's like, oh, I curated this, like literally anything right now, and so there's like, it depends what we're talking about when we say curator, because when you start working with institutions, you realise that the curator is in a large part a fictionalized bureaucratic position, and that it didn't exist beforehand, and sometimes feels like it doesn't really need to exist to the same extent it does now. But maybe this is my history of things speaking here.
I'm old enough to remember when a curator was an exhibition organizer.
Right.
And it was a much more administrative. The administrative part of it was foregrounded as much as the how you arrange things in the room or select artists or whatever.
There's a publisher, Jane Rolo, who until very recently ran Bookworks, founded it, and she said her biggest problem was, because she's a creator of content working directly with artists, and she said everyone wants to be a producer now, no one wants to be a consumer. And I think that's very much reflected in the cultural sector, where everyone somehow is participating in the creative process. I think even audiences, arguably, the panel about collaboration, and Alan Kane was talking about his relationship with artists, but you think of places like the Tanks, Anne Imhoff, that work, the audience was, the artwork was creative in a way, the way it was moving and responding to the work. And I think just in general, everyone's sort of creative now. And that curator, well, I think I'd like to end it with this is, there's maybe a moment now where we're a bit lucky, or at least in these sort of privileged environments in London and big cities, where there's no more boundaries anymore. I talk to people, and 1 minute they're an artist, the next they're a writer, or they're making an advert. A good friend of mine, Holly Blakey, started off as a dancer, and she gets phone calls from Beyonce to do a music video, and at the same time she was teaching at Slade last week, and she made an artwork for Deptford X with Gray Wilbank. She's sort of infiltrating every layers of culture, and that's because she's got that sort of mentality of not really caring about defining her practice, and people define it for her, and she doesn't care. She gets called a dazed person or whatever, but she's like doing all these exciting things and getting paid for them. And I think that's the more. If I was 10 years younger, I would try and be doing that more.
I made a music video last month. I did a show yesterday, and I taught at the Slade a week before. So.
That did Beyonce for you, that's what I want to know. So I think we're going to wrap it up there. We're going into a break now. Oh no, we have a film screening, yes. So I'd like to thank the panel. Thank you, Anna and Matt and Chris and Kirsty for inviting us, and you for joining as well. Thanks.